Imagine walking into a luxury car dealership, ready to purchase your dream car, only to be dismissed, humiliated, and treated like you don't belong. That's exactly what happened to Vanessa Grant, a poised and successful businesswoman when the dealership manager judged her by appearances. But what happens next will leave you speechless. A twist no one saw coming. This is a story about prejudice, resilience, and the stunning power of justice. Keep watching to see how Vanessa turns this moment of humiliation into a victory that changes everything. The glass facade of Prestige Motors glistened under the late afternoon sun, mirroring the opulence of the showroom within. Inside, rows of immaculate vehicles stood gleaming under soft overhead lights, each car a symbol of wealth and status. Among them, a sleek black Aston Martin, its curves a masterpiece of engineering, commanded the spotlight. Vanessa Grant stepped through the showroom's polished doors with the confidence of someone who had built her life through grit and resilience. Her tailored suit fit perfectly, a soft navy blue that complemented her warm brown complexion. She paused, letting her eyes sweep over the showroom, her gaze landing on the Aston Martin. A small smile tugged at her lips. That's the one, she thought. Behind the main counter, Alan Gray, the dealership manager, leaned casually against the desk, his light gray suit as sharp as his icy demeanor. His keen eyes scanned Vanessa, from her chic heels to the understated elegance of her outfit. Yet his assessment lingered on the color of her skin and the absence of a flashy entourage. He smirked, dismissing her with a glance, and turned his attention back to a colleague. She probably wandered in here by mistake, Alan said under his breath, just loud enough for the other salesperson to hear. They shared a chuckle before Alan adjusted his tie and pretended to focus on some papers. Vanessa ignored the murmurs, her attention fixed on the Aston Martin. She approached the car, her fingers brushing against the sleek metallic finish, as if imagining herself behind the wheel. The moment felt significant. This was more than just a purchase. It was a symbol of how far she'd come. A small crowd of customers glanced in her direction, some curious, others indifferent, but she felt their gazes nonetheless. "Excuse me," Vanessa said calmly, her voice cutting through the showroom chatter as she gestured toward Alan. Alan turned slowly, his face betraying annoyance at being interrupted. "Yes?" he said, his tone clipped. "I'd like to know more about this Aston Martin," Vanessa said, her voice steady. "Specifically, the customization options." Alan's smirk returned. "This particular model," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "is the pinnacle of luxury. It's a bit exclusive. Maybe you'd be more comfortable at our budget branch across town." The insult hit Vanessa like a gust of cold air, but she didn't flinch. Years of navigating boardrooms where she was often the only woman, and the only person of color, had taught her to maintain composure. "I understand exclusivity," Vanessa replied evenly, her words deliberate. "I'm interested in this model's performance specs and customization options. I assume you can provide those details?" Alan crossed his arms, his fake smile fading. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he had already written off. "Ma'am," he said, leaning slightly closer, "I wouldn't want to waste your time. This car costs more than most people make in 5 years. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, but she kept her voice calm. "I don't believe it's your job to decide what is or isn't a waste of my time." A few heads turned at her response, and Alan's smirk vanished completely. He felt the subtle shift in the room, the quiet murmur of customers noticing the exchange. Irritated, he straightened and waved to another employee. "Jacob," he said sharply, "why don't you assist her? I have more pressing matters to attend to." Jacob hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with his manager's behavior. Before he could respond, Vanessa spoke again, her voice firm and clear. "No need," she said. "If you're the manager, you're exactly who I need to speak with." The atmosphere in Prestige Motors grew tense, as Vanessa Grant followed Alan Gray toward the center of the showroom. The soft hum of polite conversation among the other customers faded into an awkward silence, punctuated only by the clicking of Vanessa's heels on the polished marble floor. Alan's posture exuded smug confidence, his steps brisk and sharp, as though eager to end this interaction as quickly as possible. When they reached a small display counter showcasing brochures and plaques of past awards, Alan turned to face Vanessa. His expression was a mix of forced politeness and underlying disdain. It was clear he considered this conversation unnecessary, perhaps even insulting to his time. "Let's make this quick," Alan began, folding his arms across his chest. "The Aston Martin you're interested in is a V12-powered masterpiece, handcrafted, unparalleled performance, with a base price of $250,000 before customization. Now, unless you have a check ready, I suggest we stop wasting each other's time." Vanessa's calm exterior didn't waver, though her chest tightened with anger. "I didn't ask for the price," she replied evenly. "I asked for the specifications and customization options." Alan scoffed, shaking his head slightly. "Ma'am, let's be real. A car like this is for individuals with refined tastes and means. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of our more, let's say, accessible locations?" Vanessa tilted her head slightly, studying him. His words carried the familiar sting of condescension, laced with the assumption that her presence didn't belong here. She'd encountered this attitude before, in boardrooms, at networking events, even at high-end boutiques. And she knew better than to let it rattle her. "I'm quite comfortable here," she said, her voice firm but measured. "I'd appreciate it if you provided me with the information I requested." Alan's smirk widened, though it no longer held the same confidence. Instead, it seemed to be a mask for the irritation brewing beneath the surface. "I'm afraid I'll need some proof of intent before proceeding further," he said, his tone colder now. "We've had incidents before. People pretending to be interested in purchasing vehicles they have no intention of buying." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly would proof of intent entail?" "A deposit for starters," Alan replied, his words clipped. "A serious buyer wouldn't hesitate." Vanessa took a slow breath, her eyes steady on Alan's face. "Interesting," she said. "Do you require deposits from every customer who inquires about a vehicle?" Alan faltered for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. "Of course not," he said. "But given the circumstances—" "The circumstances?" Vanessa pressed, her voice rising slightly, but still composed. Alan hesitated, realizing too late that he'd cornered himself. His irritation flared. "Look," he snapped. "We both know how this ends. Why don't we save ourselves the trouble and—" "Excuse me." The interruption came from a man standing nearby, a customer in a tailored suit holding a brochure. He looked between Vanessa and Alan with a frown. "Is there an issue here?" "No issue at all," Vanessa said quickly, flashing a polite smile. "I'm simply trying to get information about a car." Alan shot the man a warning look. "This doesn't concern you," he said curtly. "Please go back to browsing." But the man didn't move. Instead, he gave Vanessa an encouraging nod. "I'd recommend speaking with Jacob over there," he said, gesturing toward a young salesman nearby. "He's more helpful." "Thank you," Vanessa said, her smile softening slightly. Before she could move, Alan stepped in front of her, his face flushed with frustration. "I'll handle this," he said loudly, his voice drawing attention from others in the showroom. "Security!" he barked, turning toward the entrance. Vanessa blinked, momentarily stunned. "Security?" she echoed. "For what?" "For disrupting the showroom," Alan replied, his tone sharp. "This isn't a place for arguments." Vanessa straightened, her eyes narrowing. "I wasn't aware that asking questions about a car qualified as disruption." Alan ignored her, waving over two security guards who approached hesitantly. The unease on their faces was evident, but Alan's tone brooked no argument. "Escort her out," he ordered. "We don't tolerate this kind of behavior here." Vanessa glanced at the guards, then back at Alan. Her heart pounded with a mix of anger and disbelief, but she refused to let it show. I'm not going anywhere until you answer my questions, she said firmly. Alan stepped closer, lowering his voice but keeping it sharp. You're wasting my time, and frankly, you're not the type of person we cater to. Leave now, or I'll call the police. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Vanessa's chest tightened further, but she stood her ground. Do what you feel you need to, she said calmly. I won't be intimidated. Alan's lips curled into a smug smile as he pulled out his phone. Don't say I didn't warn you. The tension in the room was palpable as customers whispered among themselves, some pulling out their phones to record the unfolding scene. Vanessa glanced around, noting the murmurs of disapproval from a few onlookers, but none dared to step in further. As Alan spoke to the police, Vanessa felt a wave of sadness beneath her anger, not for herself, but for the countless others who had likely faced similar treatment without the means to fight back. But this time would be different. She folded her arms, standing tall as she prepared for whatever came next. The gleaming interior of Prestige Motors seemed to dim as the tension escalated. Vanessa Grant stood firm in the center of the showroom, the steady hum of conversations replaced by hushed murmurs and the occasional click of recording phones. Alan Gray, the dealership manager, paced with his phone pressed to his ear. A smug grin plastered across his face as he described Vanessa's disruptive behavior to the police. Yeah, she's refusing to leave, Alan said loudly, his tone dripping with faux authority. She's causing a scene, and we can't have this in a place of business. Vanessa folded her arms, her steady composure masking the storm of emotions swirling inside her. The humiliation of being treated as an intruder in a space she had every right to occupy burned, but she knew better than to let her anger show. This wasn't her first encounter with prejudice masquerading as professionalism, and she had learned how to turn such moments into opportunities for clarity and justice. Minutes felt like hours as the tension in the room grew. The security guards flanking her shifted uncomfortably, their expressions betraying their unease with the situation. Vanessa noticed one of them glancing at her with something akin to an apology in his eyes, but he remained silent. When the distant sound of sirens pierced the air, Vanessa's stomach clenched involuntarily. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had done nothing wrong. Her only offense was daring to exist in a space Alan believed wasn't for her. The police entered the dealership moments later, their uniforms sharp and their faces neutral. The lead officer, a tall man with a firm gaze, scanned the room before approaching Alan. We got a call about a disturbance, he said, his voice professional but firm. Yes, officer, Alan said, stepping forward with exaggerated confidence. This woman, he gestured dismissively at Vanessa, has been causing a scene, refusing to leave despite multiple requests. She's disrupting our business. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice steady but tinged with quiet defiance. Officer, I've done nothing but inquire about a car I'm interested in purchasing. This man called security, and now you because he refuses to answer my questions. The officer's gaze shifted between Alan and Vanessa, his brow furrowing slightly. Ma'am, he said cautiously, do you have any identification on you? Vanessa's jaw tightened, but she reached into her purse, careful to make her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She handed over her driver's license, her fingers brushing against the polished leather of her wallet, a small reminder of her success. The officer examined the license briefly before returning it to her. I see no reason for her to leave unless she's violated a policy or law, he said, addressing Alan. Alan's face reddened, and he stammered for a moment before regaining his composure. Look, she's making our other customers uncomfortable. I don't need a reason to deny service. This is private property. The officer sighed, clearly reluctant, but nodded. I understand, ma'am, he said, turning to Vanessa. Unfortunately, if the management asks you to leave, we have to enforce it. Vanessa nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. I understand, she said quietly, though her calm tone carried an edge of steel. The officer reached for his handcuffs, and for a moment, Vanessa's heart skipped. "Is that necessary?" she asked, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "Standard procedure," the officer replied, though his tone carried a note of apology. As the cold metal cuffs clicked around her wrists, a murmur of disbelief rippled through the showroom. Vanessa stood tall, her silk blouse now wrinkled against the restraint, but her dignity unshaken. The cameras of onlookers followed every moment, capturing the stark contrast between her poised demeanor and the unjust scene unfolding. Alan smirked, his arms crossed as he watched her being led toward the door. "Next time," he called out, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "know your place." Vanessa didn't flinch. She walked toward the police car with her head held high, the weight of the cuffs unable to diminish her strength. As she stepped outside into the bright sunlight, she turned to glance back at the dealership. Alan's smirk was still plastered across his face, but she noticed the faint flicker of unease in his eyes as the cameras continued rolling. Today, she thought to herself, he's laughing, but tomorrow he won't be. The police car door closed behind her with a soft thud, and as it pulled away, Vanessa's mind raced. Not with anger, but with purpose. She wasn't just leaving Prestige Motors. She was planning her return. A return that would be marked by justice, not for herself alone, but for every person who had ever been dismissed, disrespected, or discriminated against. The day after her humiliating exit from Prestige Motors, Vanessa Grant sat in her expansive home office, the early morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. On her desk lay stacks of meticulously organized files and reports, but her focus was elsewhere. Her son, Daniel Grant, stood nearby, his tall frame radiating the quiet confidence of a seasoned attorney. He had arrived moments earlier, his expression a mix of concern and resolve. "She had you handcuffed?" Daniel asked, his voice low but edged with anger as he paced the room. Vanessa nodded, her face calm but her eyes betraying the weight of the previous day. "They didn't even ask questions. The manager, Alan Gray, was so eager to dismiss me that he didn't care about who I was or why I was there." Daniel stopped pacing and faced his mother. "He'll care now. We'll make sure of it." Vanessa allowed herself a small smile. She knew Daniel well enough to trust that he had already begun crafting a strategy. As one of the youngest and most respected attorneys in the city, Daniel had a reputation for dismantling opponents with precision. He had inherited her tenacity and intelligence, and she took pride in watching him use those traits to fight for justice. "Tell me about this Alan Gray," Daniel said, taking a seat across from her. "What kind of man are we dealing with?" Vanessa leaned back in her chair, recalling the previous day's events. "He's arrogant, dismissive, and blinded by his own prejudices. He assumed I didn't belong the moment I walked through the door. I could see it in his eyes." Daniel nodded, taking mental notes. "We'll use his arrogance against him. Let's start with the facts. I'll draft a discrimination and defamation lawsuit against Prestige Motors. But I want more than legal action. This is about exposing the entire system that allows people like him to operate." Vanessa tilted her head, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Daniel's eyes gleamed with determination. "First, we're going public. We'll leak the story to a trusted journalist, someone who can frame it as part of the larger issue of systemic bias in luxury markets. Once the story gains traction, we'll follow up with targeted legal action. The goal isn't just to hold Alan accountable, it's to force Prestige Motors and its parent company to implement real change." Vanessa felt a swell of pride as she listened to Daniel outline his plan. "And the company's parent organization?" she asked. Daniel smiled, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "That's the most interesting part. Prestige Motors is owned by LuxCorp International, a company you've been quietly investing in for years. You currently own a 20% stake, which makes you one of their largest shareholders." Vanessa's eyebrows lifted in surprise, though her expression quickly shifted to one of satisfaction. Well, that does change things. Daniel continued. We'll leverage your position as a shareholder to push for immediate reforms, and if they resist, we'll escalate. By the time we're done, Prestige Motors will either comply or face a complete overhaul. Vanessa stood, walking over to the window and looking out over the city skyline. This isn't just about me, she said quietly. It's about every person who's ever been dismissed, belittled, or humiliated because they didn't fit someone's narrow view of who belongs. If we're going to do this, we're going all the way. Daniel rose, his jaw set. Then let's get started. The next day, a sleek black sedan pulled into the parking lot of Prestige Motors. Daniel Grant stepped out, his tailored suit and polished demeanor immediately drawing the attention of staff and customers alike. He strode confidently into the dealership, a folder of legal documents tucked under one arm. Alan Gray, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, was chatting with a customer when Daniel approached. "Excuse me," Daniel said, his voice steady but commanding. "Are you Alan Gray?" Alan turned, his expression shifting from irritation to unease as he took in Daniel's imposing presence. "Yes, that's me. And you are?" Daniel extended a hand, a polite smile playing on his lips. "Daniel Grant. I believe you met my mother yesterday, Vanessa Grant." Alan's face paled as recognition dawned. I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Daniel replied, withdrawing his hand and placing the folder on the counter. "This is a formal notice of legal action against you and Prestige Motors for discrimination, defamation, and false imprisonment." Alan's mouth opened and closed as he struggled to find words. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Daniel interrupted, his voice cool. "What you did to my mother was not only unethical, but illegal. You assumed she didn't belong here because of her appearance, and you escalated the situation unnecessarily. Now you'll face the consequences." Alan glanced around nervously, his earlier bravado completely gone. The other staff members were watching from a distance, their curiosity turning to unease as the confrontation unfolded. Daniel leaned in slightly, his tone firm but measured. "You should also know that my mother is one of the largest shareholders in LuxCorp International, which means she has significant influence over your parent company. I'd prepare for a call from the corporate board if I were you." Alan's face turned ashen as the weight of Daniel's words sank in. "Please. There's no need for all this," he stammered. "I'll apologize." "It's too late for apologies," Daniel said, straightening. "What happens next is up to the courts and the corporate board. I suggest you take this time to reflect on your actions." As Daniel turned to leave, Alan slumped into his chair, his earlier confidence shattered. The customers and employees who had witnessed the exchange whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between Alan and Daniel. Outside, Daniel paused to make a call. "Mom," he said when Vanessa answered. "Everything's in motion. He knows what's coming." Vanessa's voice was calm but resolute. "Good. Now let's make sure he and everyone else learns the lesson they need to." Alan Gray sat in his glass-walled office at Prestige Motors, nervously tapping his pen against the mahogany desk. The once pristine showroom now felt suffocating, as though the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated every corner of his discomfort. Ever since the confrontation with Daniel Grant, Alan had been unable to shake the unease that followed him like a shadow. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Gray, there's a Mr. Grant here to see you again," his assistant said, her voice tinged with nervousness. Alan's heart sank. "Send him in," he said, straightening his tie and attempting to regain his composure. The office door opened, and Daniel Grant entered, exuding the same air of quiet authority he had displayed during their last encounter. This time, he was accompanied by another man in a tailored navy suit carrying a briefcase. They moved with purpose, their presence heavy with the promise of consequences. "Mr. Gray," Daniel said, taking a seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. This is Jonathan Price, a representative from Lux Corp International. I trust you're familiar with the name." Alan's mouth went dry. Of course he knew Lux Corp, the parent company that owned Prestige Motors. He had built his career leveraging their reputation for exclusivity and opulence, but the thought of their involvement in his current predicament was enough to make his hands sweat. "What's this about?" Alan asked, feigning ignorance even as dread coiled in his stomach. Jonathan Price placed the briefcase on the desk, opening it with a click. Inside were several neatly arranged files, each bearing Lux Corp's emblem. "We're here to discuss the allegations of discrimination and misconduct leveled against you and this dealership," Jonathan said, his tone professional but unyielding. Alan's attempt at a confident smile faltered. "This is all a misunderstanding," he began, his voice shaky. "I never intended to offend anyone." Daniel leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Misunderstanding?" he echoed. "You had my mother handcuffed and escorted out of this dealership based on nothing but your assumptions. That's not a misunderstanding, Mr. Gray. It's blatant discrimination." Jonathan cleared his throat, drawing Alan's attention back to the briefcase. "Lux Corp takes allegations like these very seriously," he said. "As of this morning, the board has decided to conduct a full audit of Prestige Motors operations, focusing on compliance with anti-discrimination policies and customer service standards." Alan felt his breath quicken. "An audit? Surely that's not necessary. We've always operated above board." "Have you?" Daniel asked, his tone sharp. "Because I've spoken to multiple former customers and employees who paint a very different picture. Your actions aren't just unethical, they're illegal. And now you'll face the legal and financial repercussions." Jonathan pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. "This is a preliminary report detailing the steps Lux Corp will be taking. Effective immediately, you are suspended from your position as dealership manager, pending the outcome of the audit." Alan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Suspended? You can't do this?" "I can," Jonathan said calmly. "And I am. Lux Corp's reputation is on the line, and we won't allow one individual's behavior to tarnish our brand." Alan's mind raced, searching for a way out, but he was cornered. The power dynamic in the room was palpable, and for the first time, he realized just how powerless he truly was. Outside the office, a small crowd of employees had gathered, their curiosity piqued by the presence of Daniel and Jonathan. Whispers spread quickly as they speculated about the unfolding confrontation. When Daniel and Jonathan finally emerged, Alan trailing behind them with a defeated expression, the murmurs grew louder. Daniel paused in the middle of the showroom, his voice carrying authority as he addressed the staff. "Let this serve as a lesson," he said. "Prestige Motors will no longer tolerate discrimination or prejudice in any form. Moving forward, we'll be implementing mandatory diversity training and a zero-tolerance policy for misconduct. This dealership has the potential to be a beacon of excellence, but only if it represents the values of inclusivity and respect." The employees exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement. Daniel's words carried weight, and his presence exuded a sense of hope that things might finally change for the better. As Daniel and Jonathan exited the dealership, Alan remained behind, his world crumbling around him. The once proud manager of Prestige Motors now faced a harsh reality. His arrogance and prejudice had not only cost him his position, but also his reputation. That evening, Daniel returned to his mother's home, where Vanessa awaited him in the sitting room. She looked up as he entered, her expression calm but curious. "How did it go?" she asked. Daniel smiled, taking a seat across from her. "Better than I expected. Lux Corp is conducting a full audit, and Alan Gray is officially suspended. He'll be lucky if he walks away from this with anything resembling a career." Vanessa nodded, her satisfaction tempered by a sense of purpose. "Good. But this is just the beginning. The goal isn't just to punish him, it's to ensure no one else has to go through what I did." Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious. "We'll make it happen, Mom." Together. As they discussed their next steps, the weight of the day began to lift. For Vanessa and Daniel, this was more than a victory. It was a step toward creating lasting change, one battle at a time. The following week, Prestige Motors underwent a transformation that rippled through every corner of the dealership. Employees arrived to find an email from LuxCorp's headquarters outlining sweeping changes to their policies and operations. The email was clear. Prestige Motors was about to become a symbol of inclusivity and respect, or it would cease to exist. Vanessa Grant stood at the head of a conference room filled with Prestige Motors employees, her presence commanding yet warm. Dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit, she addressed the staff with poise and purpose. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady but firm. "Today marks a new chapter for Prestige Motors. For too long, this dealership has operated under the shadow of outdated practices and biases. That ends now." She paused, scanning the room. Some employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others nodded in agreement. Vanessa continued, her tone softening just slightly. "I understand that change can be daunting," she said. "But with change comes the opportunity to grow. We're implementing new policies designed to ensure this dealership becomes a place where every customer and employee is treated with dignity and respect." Vanessa outlined the key initiatives: mandatory diversity and inclusion training, an updated code of conduct with a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, and a streamlined process for reporting and addressing misconduct. She also announced a review of hiring practices to create a more diverse and representative workforce. "These changes aren't just about compliance," she emphasized. "They're about building a culture where everyone feels valued. This isn't just a dealership, it's a community." Meanwhile, Alan Gray's world continued to unravel. Suspended from his position and facing legal action, he found himself ostracized by former colleagues and friends. The board of LuxCorp had issued a formal reprimand, and whispers of his behavior spread quickly through the industry. One afternoon, Alan sat alone in his apartment, scrolling through news articles about the incident. Headlines like "Prestige Motors Manager Accused of Discrimination" and "CEO Vanessa Grant Speaks Out Against Bias in Luxury Markets" dominated the business section. His reputation, once a source of pride, was now a source of shame. A knock at the door startled him. When he opened it, he found a courier holding an envelope bearing the LuxCorp logo. "This is for you," the courier said, handing him the envelope before disappearing down the hall. Alan's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a termination letter, citing his actions as in direct violation of company values and ethics. The letter also informed him that he was barred from any future employment within LuxCorp or its subsidiaries. Alan sank into a chair, the weight of his decisions crashing down on him. His arrogance had cost him everything. As news of Vanessa's reforms spread, the community began to take notice. Customers who had once avoided Prestige Motors due to its unwelcoming reputation started to return, curious to see the changes firsthand. Some even shared their own stories of discrimination, finding solidarity in Vanessa's public stand against injustice. One such customer, a young woman named Leah, walked into the dealership with her father. They had been regular clients years ago but had stopped visiting after a previous encounter with Alan. "It feels different now," Leah said as she browsed the showroom. "There's a warmth here that wasn't there before." Her father nodded, smiling. "That's what happens when good people lead." To celebrate the dealership's transformation, Vanessa and her son Daniel hosted an open house event at Prestige Motors. The showroom was bustling with activity, current and former customers mingling with employees, journalists capturing the moment, and community leaders praising the efforts to create a more inclusive environment. Vanessa stood near the gleaming black Aston Martin she had purchased just weeks earlier. She greeted guests with genuine warmth, her presence a testament to the power of resilience and leadership. Daniel joined her, a glass of sparkling water in hand. "Looks like the turnout exceeded expectations," he said, glancing around the room. Vanessa smiled. "This is what happens when you stand for something," she replied. "People take notice. And more importantly, they start to believe change is possible." As the evening unfolded, the atmosphere was one of celebration and hope. Prestige Motors was no longer just a dealership. It was a symbol of progress and possibility. The changes at Prestige Motors sparked a national conversation about discrimination in luxury markets. Other dealerships and businesses began reevaluating their own practices, inspired by Vanessa's example. Social media buzzed with stories of individuals who had faced similar challenges, their voices amplified by the momentum of the movement Vanessa and Daniel had ignited. That night, as Vanessa and Daniel left the event, they paused outside the showroom. The lights illuminated the Aston Martins and Bentleys inside, but it was the sign above the entrance that caught their attention. Prestige Motors, where everyone belongs. Vanessa took a deep breath, feeling a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in years. "This is just the beginning," she said softly. Daniel nodded, his gaze steady. "And we're ready for whatever comes next." With that, they walked to their car, leaving behind a dealership and a legacy forever changed. The weeks that followed Prestige Motors' transformation were nothing short of extraordinary. What had begun as a humiliating encounter for Vanessa Grant had become the foundation for systemic change. The dealership's story, led by her resilience and determination, inspired countless others to speak out and demand better. Prestige Motors hosted a grand reopening to commemorate its transformation. The event was open to the community, featuring live music, gourmet catering, and speeches from key figures in the dealership's journey. Banners adorned the walls, proclaiming the dealership's new motto, "Prestige Motors, where everyone belongs." Vanessa arrived in her sleek black Aston Martin, stepping out to applause from the gathered crowd. Her elegant demeanor and confident smile were a testament to her victory, not just over Alan Gray, but over the entrenched biases she had faced throughout her life. Daniel was by her side, his tailored suit reflecting the same poise and professionalism he brought to every case. Together, they represented a family committed to justice and change. Vanessa took the stage, the crowd falling silent in anticipation. Her voice, steady and warm, carried across the showroom. "Thank you all for being here today," she began. "This isn't just about a dealership. This is about a community coming together to stand against prejudice and to demand respect and equity for everyone." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "When I walked into Prestige Motors a few weeks ago, I wasn't looking for a fight. I was simply looking to purchase a car. But what I found was an opportunity to address an issue that far too many people face every day." Vanessa recounted the events that had led to the dealership's transformation, emphasizing the importance of turning moments of injustice into catalysts for change. "This is proof," she said, "that when we confront prejudice with courage and determination, we can create spaces where everyone feels valued." Her words resonated deeply, drawing nods and applause from the audience. The event also marked the official launch of the Grant Foundation, an initiative Vanessa and Daniel had established to provide legal aid and advocacy for victims of discrimination. The foundation's mission was to empower individuals to stand up for their rights and to drive systemic change across industries. Daniel took the stage to introduce the foundation, his voice filled with conviction. "My mother has always taught me that power isn't about domination. It's about creating opportunities for others. The Grant Foundation will carry that lesson forward, ensuring that no one has to face discrimination alone." The announcement was met with a standing ovation, the crowd's support a testament to the grant's impact. As the event continued, guests mingled throughout the showroom. Customers who had once avoided Prestige Motors due to its unwelcoming reputation shared stories of their renewed trust in the dealership. Employees who had felt stifled under Alan Gray's management expressed gratitude for the positive changes Vanessa had implemented. Leah, a returning customer who had once experienced Alan's dismissive attitude, approached Vanessa with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "You've given people like me the courage to believe we belong in spaces like this." Vanessa smiled warmly. "We all belong," she replied, "and it's up to us to ensure that everyone feels welcome." As the event wound down, Vanessa and Daniel stood by the entrance, watching the guests depart. The lights of the Aston Martins inside the showroom glinted like stars, a symbol of the dealership's new beginning. "Today was a good day," Daniel said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Vanessa nodded. "It was, but there's still so much work to do." Daniel smiled. "And we're ready for it." Vanessa glanced at her son, the pride in her eyes unmistakable. "You've become everything I hoped you'd be," she said softly. "And I had the best teacher," he replied. As Vanessa and Daniel drove away from the event in their matching Aston Martins, Vanessa reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the challenges of her early career to the prejudice she had faced at Prestige Motors, every experience had shaped her into the leader she was today. "This isn't just about cars," she thought. "It's about people, about ensuring that no one is made to feel less than they are." Her determination solidified as she looked out at the city skyline. The fight for justice wasn't over, but she knew that with the right allies and the right vision, anything was possible. The story of Vanessa Grant and Prestige Motors became a national symbol of resilience and the power of standing up against prejudice. The Grant Foundation quickly gained traction, offering hope and support to countless individuals who had faced discrimination. Vanessa's name became synonymous with grace and justice, her journey inspiring others to fight for what they deserved. In the years that followed, Prestige Motors thrived, not just as a dealership, but as a beacon of inclusivity. Its transformation served as a reminder that even the most deeply rooted biases could be uprooted with courage and persistence. As Vanessa once said, justice isn't just about winning a battle. It's about creating a world where battles no longer need to be fought. The Grant story was a testament to that vision, a legacy that would endure for generations to come. This story is a reminder that each of us has the ability to challenge bias, create dialogue, and leave the world a little fairer than we found it. Vanessa's triumph is more than just her own. It's a victory for everyone who has ever been underestimated. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join us for more powerful tales that spark change, and let us know in the comments. How would you stand up for what's right? Together, we can keep making a difference.